May 19, 1945. The transport truck rumbled to a stop on a dirt road that seemed to lead nowhere and everywhere at once. Elfrida Hartman pressed her face against the canvas covering, desperate for her first glimpse of the prisoner of war camp where she and 47 other German women would spend an uncertain future. What she saw instead made her forget to breathe. Wheat. An ocean of golden wheat stretching to a horizon so distant it seemed to curve with the earth itself. No buildings broke the endless expanse. No bomb craters scarred the fields. No burned villages dotted the landscape. Just grain, rippling in waves under a sky so vast and blue it felt like drowning in reverse. "Is this still North America?" Gudrun Lindemann whispered beside her, her voice carrying the same disbelief that had seized them all. The young communications specialist from Dresden had spent the last 2 years of the war in underground bunkers, coordinating messages between units as Allied bombs reduced her city to rubble. She had not seen an intact field since 1943. The truck's canvas flap pulled back fully, revealing their destination. Prairie Vista Camp sat like a small collection of wooden buildings against the incomprehensible vastness of the Saskatchewan landscape. But it was not the camp that captured their attention. It was everything around it, fields that seemed to have never known war, farmhouses with intact roofs, grain silos that stood tall and full instead of collapsed and empty. Sigrun Wolf, the youngest of their group at 20 years old, began to cry silently. The administrative clerk from Hamburg had processed food ration cards for the last year of the war, watching the allocations shrink from inadequate to impossible. She knew exactly how many grams of bread each German citizen was supposed to receive. She could calculate in her head how many people could be fed by a single one of those distant silos. The numbers made her weep. Lieutenant Myrtle Kensington stood waiting as the women climbed down from the transport, her Canadian uniform crisp despite the prairie wind that whipped across the open land. She was younger than Elfrida had expected, perhaps 30 years old with sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. When she spoke, her voice carried an unexpected gentleness. "Welcome to Prairie Vista Camp. I know this must be overwhelming, but you are safe here. You will be treated according to the Geneva Convention and with the dignity that all persons deserve." Elfrida heard the words, but she could not stop staring past the lieutenant at the fields beyond. In Berlin, she had picked through rubble for bits of coal to burn for warmth. She had watched neighbors trade family heirlooms for half a loaf of bread. She had believed the propaganda that told her America and its allies were starving, desperate, on the verge of collapse. But this land had never known hunger. This earth had never been poisoned by war. And standing on its soil, Elfrida Hartman felt the first crack in everything she had been taught to believe. The barracks smelled of fresh pine, lumber, and soap, so different from the damp concrete bunkers Elfrida remembered from her final months in Berlin. Gudrun Lindemann sat on her assigned bunk, staring at the clean wool blanket as if it might disappear. In Dresden, she had slept under a coat and newspapers for the last 6 months before her capture. "They told us the Canadians were rationing worse than we were," Heide Marie Baumann said quietly. The medical auxiliary from Munich had treated wounded soldiers who were dying not just from injuries, but from malnutrition and disease brought on by starvation. She had watched men waste away on 500 calories a day. They said the Allied nations were on the verge of collapse. Ingeborg Schwartz moved to the window, looking out at the impossible landscape. At 28, she was one of the oldest among them, supply coordinator from Stuttgart, who had spent years trying to stretch inadequate resources across desperate needs. "I calculated supply chains," she said, her voice hollow. "I knew exactly how little food we had, but I believed we were all suffering equally. I thought their people were starving too." The view from the window contradicted every calculation, every report, every propaganda broadcast they had ever heard. In the distance, a farmer drove a tractor across his field, the machine moving easily across land that showed no signs of the total war economy they had lived under. Cattle grazed in green pastures, A farmhouse stood intact, smoke rising from its chimney in a peaceful curl. Kriemhild Neumann, the nurse from Cologne, joined Ingeborg at the window. "My hospital ran out of morphine in 1944, she said softly. "We performed amputations with whatever we could find. I held down screaming boys while surgeons cut off their legs with alcohol as the only jeune anesthetic." She pressed her palm against the glass. "And they have cattle grazing, just grazing, like there is no war at all." Roswitha Engel, the mechanic from Frankfurt, sat on her bunk with her head in her hands. She had spent the last 2 years of the war cannibalizing broken vehicles to keep a few operational, scrounging for parts, making do with whatever scraps she could find. "I rebuilt engines with pieces held together by wire and prayer," she said. "And I saw that tractor. It is newer than anything we had even before the war started." Adelheid Klein, the youngest at 19, spoke for the first time since their arrival. The telegraph operator from Nuremberg had transmitted countless messages about victories that never came, about resources that did not exist, about an enemy that was supposedly on the verge of defeat. "They lied to us," she whispered, "about everything." The silence that followed was not peaceful. It was the sound of 48 women beginning to understand that they had fought for a cause built on deception, that their sacrifices had been based on lies, and that the enemy they had been taught to hate had never suffered the way they had been told. The dining hall was simple but clean, with long wooden tables and benches arranged in neat rows. Sergeant Angus McTavish, a broad-shouldered Scot with a thick accent, directed the women to their seats with gestures more than words. His demeanor was neither cruel nor particularly friendly, simply professional. But it was what appeared on the tables that made Elfrida feel like she had stepped into a propaganda film, except this was real. Fresh bread. Not the gray, sawdust, extended loaves they had choked down in Germany, but actual bread with a golden crust and soft, white interior. Butter, real butter, not the synthetic substitute made from coal derivatives. Portions of meat that would have fed a German family for 3 days. Vegetables that looked like they had been harvested that morning. Heidemarie Baumann stared at her plate as if it might be poisoned. As a medical auxiliary, she had calculated nutritional values for dying patients, trying to determine who might survive on minimal calories. This single meal contained more nutrition than most German civilians saw in a week. "This cannot be standard rations," she said quietly. "This must be special, for show." Lieutenant Myrtle Kensington overheard her from the doorway. She approached the table, her expression unreadable. "This is standard prisoner rations, according to Geneva Convention requirements," she said in perfect German, startling several of the women. "You will receive 3 meals like this every day." Gudrun Lindemann picked up the slice of bread with trembling fingers. She had not seen bread this white since childhood, before the war, when Germany still imported wheat from abroad. She bit into it and immediately began to cry. It tasted like bread was supposed to taste, like something made to nourish, rather, than merely to fill a stomach temporarily before hunger returned. Around the table, similar reactions rippled through the group. Sigrun Wolf ate slowly, methodically, as if trying to memorize every flavor. Ingeborg Schwartz simply sat with her fork in her hand, unable to begin. Kriemhild Neumann ate quickly, then immediately felt sick, her stomach unused to real food after years of deprivation. Private Merle Jacobson, a young guard with a farm background, noticed Kriemhild's distress. He brought her a glass of water and spoke in halting English. "Slow, eat slow, body needs time." His kindness, simple and unasked for, made Kriemhild cry harder. Roswitha Engel finally spoke what they were all thinking. "Our families are starving. Right now in Germany, people are eating grass and tree bark. And we are sitting here with butter, real butter." The guilt in her voice was suffocating. Elfrida set down her fork, unable to continue eating. She thought of her mother in Berlin, her sister, her nephew who would be 6 years old now if he had survived. She thought of the ration cards that promised 200 grams of bread per person per day when bread was available at all. They did not just lie about the enemy, she said quietly. They lied about everything. Lieutenant Myrtle Kensington stood before the assembled prisoners the morning after their arrival, her posture military, but her expression thoughtful. When she began to speak, it was not in English but in fluent, unaccented German that could have come from any street in Hamburg or Berlin. My name is Lieutenant Myrtle Kensington. My parents immigrated to Canada from Bavaria in 1922. I grew up speaking German at home and English everywhere else. I understand that you are confused and frightened. I want you to know that while you are prisoners of war, you will be treated with dignity and respect according to international law. Elfrida felt something shift in her chest. This woman, their captor, their enemy, spoke German like a native. More than that, she spoke it with the care of someone who understood not just the language, but the culture behind it. There was no mockery in her tone, no condescension, just clear, direct communication. Gudrun raised her hand hesitantly, as if still in school. "May I ask a question, Lieutenant?" "You may. Why did your parents leave Germany?" Myrtle's expression softened slightly. They saw what was coming. My father was a university professor who lost his position for refusing to join the party. They left before leaving became impossible. They chose Canada because of its openness, its land, its promise of a new beginning. The implications hung heavy in the air. Her parents had seen the danger before most Germans even recognized it existed. They had escaped what these women had lived through. Sigrun Wolf spoke next, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you hate us for what Germany became?" Myrtle considered the question carefully before answering. "I hate what was done in Germany's name. I hate the ideology that led to this war. But you are individual women who made choices based on limited information in impossible circumstances. My job is not to judge you. My job is to ensure your safety and well-being while you are in our custody." Heidemarie Baumann stood slowly. "Lieutenant, may I ask about your medical facilities? I am trained as a medical auxiliary. If there is work I can do, I would prefer to be useful." "We have a camp physician, but he could use assistance. I will arrange for you to meet with him." Myrtle made a note on her clipboard. "Anyone else with specialized skills who wishes to work may submit a request. Productive activity makes the time pass more easily." Roswitha raised her hand. "I am a mechanic. If you have equipment that needs maintenance." "We do? I will arrange that as well." Ingeborg watched this exchange with growing wonder. In German prison camps, captured Russians had been worked to death. Captured British and Americans had been treated marginally better, but still as enemies deserving only the minimum required by law. Yet here was this Canadian officer of German descent herself, offering them work not as punishment but as opportunity. After the assembly ended, Elfrida approached Myrtle cautiously. "Lieutenant, your German is remarkable, better than mine, and I was born in Berlin." Myrtle smiled slightly. "My mother insisted we maintain our language and culture, even here. She said that Germany and its government were not the same thing, and that someday the government would fall, but the culture would remain." "Your mother was very wise," Elfrida said quietly. "She was," Myrtle replied, "and she would want me to tell you that what you were is not what you must remain." The mail arrived on a Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks after their arrival at Prairie Vista Camp. Corporal Marguerite Lefebvre distributed letters to those fortunate enough to receive them, her French-accented English soft with sympathy, as she handed each envelope over. Only 12 of the 48 women received correspondence. The rest sat quietly, pretending not to watch. Ingeborg Schwartz held her letter from Stuttgart with shaking hands. It was from her younger sister Monica, written on paper so thin it was nearly transparent. The ink was pale, diluted to make it last longer. She read it once quickly, then again more slowly, her expression growing more troubled with each line. "Everything is fine here," her sister had written. "We are managing well. Do not worry about us. The neighbors are kind and we share what we have. The garden produced some potatoes this year. Please take care of yourself and do not concern yourself with matters at home." Ingeborg set the letter down on the table in the common room where several other women had gathered to read their own correspondence. "She is lying," she said flatly. "Every single word is a lie designed to spare me worry." Gudrun looked up from her own letter, her eyes red. "Mine too. My mother writes that they are comfortable, that food is adequate, that the rebuilding is progressing well." She laughed bitterly. "We both know Dresden is rubble. There is no rebuilding, there is only survival." Kriemhild held a letter from her brother, a former soldier who had lost his right arm at Stalingrad. He wrote cheerfully about finding work, about the community coming together, about hope for the future. Not one word about the starvation rations, the black market that consumed any remaining wealth, the former soldiers begging in streets because there were no jobs for men missing limbs. "They are protecting us," Haida Marie said quietly. She had received no letter, but she listened to the others with growing understanding. "They do not want us to suffer guilt on top of captivity, so they lie about how bad things are." Elfrida thought about the meal she had eaten that morning. Fresh eggs, bread with jam, coffee that actually tasted like coffee. She thought about the Canadian farmland, visible from every window, abundant and untouched by war. Then she thought about her family in Berlin, if they still lived, eating whatever they could scavenge from ruins. "We know the truth anyway," Sigrun said, her voice hollow. "We have seen the newsreels here. The Canadian newspapers do not hide what Germany looks like now. Our families cannot protect us from reality when we can see it printed in photographs every day." Roswitha stood and walked to the window, looking out at fields of wheat ready for harvest. "My letter says nothing about hunger, but I can read what is not written. My mother mentions that my nephew is small for his age. Small. She means starving. She means stunted from malnutrition. But she cannot write those words because the censors might strike them out, or because she cannot bear to make it real by naming it." Adelheid Klein, the youngest, spoke with unexpected clarity. "They are lying. To protect us. We have been lying to ourselves to protect our sanity. And Germany lied to all of us to protect a regime that deserved to fall. Everything is built on lies, and only now can we see it because we are standing in a place where the truth is visible from every window." Kriemhild Neumann woke in the night, gasping for air, her heart racing with panic that had no immediate cause. She sat up in her bunk, trying to orient herself in the darkness of the barracks. The other women slept around her, their breathing soft and steady. Nothing was wrong. No bombs were falling, no sirens wailed, yet her chest felt tight, her breath coming in short, inadequate gasps. She rose quietly and made her way outside, past the night guard who nodded but did not stop her. The compound was open enough that there was nowhere to escape to, and everyone knew it. She walked to the fence line and stopped, staring out at the landscape illuminated by a moon so bright it cast shadows. The sky stretched forever. In Cologne, buildings had crowded close together, creating narrow corridors of sky between rooflines. During the war, smoke from fires had made the sky itself claustrophobic, pressing down like a physical weight. Here, the prairie sky opened endlessly in all directions, and Kriemhild found it terrifying. "Cannot sleep?" Lieutenant Kensington's voice came from behind her, gentle and unsurprised. "The space," Kriemhild managed to say in English, struggling for words, "is too much, too big, too open." Myrtle stepped beside her, looking out at the same landscape. Agoraphobia, fear of open spaces. It is common in people who have lived through urban warfare. Your mind adapted to enclosed spaces for survival. Now it does not know how to interpret unlimited horizon. "In German, please," Kriemhild said, her English failing under stress. Myrtle switched languages smoothly. Your mind learned that walls meant safety, that open spaces meant exposure to bombs and danger. Here, there are no walls to hide behind. Your instincts are telling you that you are vulnerable, even though rationally you know you are safe. Kriemhild nodded, tears streaming down her face. I thought freedom would feel different. I thought it would feel like relief, but this feels like drowning in air. It will take time, Myrtle said. Your body needs to unlearn the fear that kept you alive in Germany. Some of the other women are experiencing this too. Heide Marie has panic attacks in open spaces. Gudrun refuses to leave the barracks except when required. Your mind is trying to protect you from dangers that no longer exist. How long? Kriemhild asked. Different for everyone. Some adapt in weeks, others take years. Some never fully adjust. Myrtle paused. But you will learn to breathe again. I promise you that. They stood in silence, watching the infinite prairie night. Slowly, Kriemhild's breathing steadied. The panic did not disappear, but it became manageable, a presence she could exist alongside, rather than a force that controlled her completely. In Cologne, she said quietly, I could navigate the city in complete darkness by knowing which ruins I was passing. I knew every bombed-out building, every collapsed street. I was never lost because destruction was my map. Here, everything looks the same in every direction. I have no landmarks, no reference points. I do not know how to exist in a place that war never touched. Then we will teach you, Myrtle said simply, one day at a time, one breath at a time, until the sky feels like freedom instead of falling. Private Merle Jacobson approached the assembled prisoners with an unexpected proposal. The young farm boy from rural Saskatchewan carried himself with an easy confidence that came from years of working land. He spoke in simple English, with Lieutenant Kensington translating for those who struggled with the language. There's a plot of land behind the barracks that's not being used. Captain Pemberton has approved a garden project if any of you are interested in tending it. Voluntary work only, no obligation. Roswitha Engel was the first to raise her hand, followed quickly by Sigrun Wolf and Adelheid Klein. Within minutes, nearly every woman in the group had volunteered. The prospect of working with soil, of growing something, seemed to answer a need they had not known how to articulate. The next morning, Merle arrived with tools, seeds, and a wheelbarrow full of rich, dark soil. Elfrida knelt beside the garden plot and pressed her hands into the earth, feeling its texture. It was loose, fertile, full of organic matter. She thought of the exhausted soil in Berlin's makeshift victory gardens, gray and lifeless after years of chemicals and neglect. This soil has never known war, she said quietly to Gudrun, who knelt beside her. Gudrun nodded, running the earth through her fingers. In Dresden, we tried to grow potatoes in rubble. The soil was mixed with brick dust and ash. Nothing grew properly. Everything tasted of smoke. Merle watched them work, occasionally offering guidance in his limited vocabulary. Deep, plant deep, water every day. His instructions were simple, but his patience was remarkable. When Heide Marie struggled to understand his explanation of spacing, he simply demonstrated, his movements clear and unhurried. Ingeborg found herself transported back to childhood summers at her grandmother's farm, before the war, when gardening was about abundance rather than survival. She had forgotten that plants could be tended with joy rather than desperation, that growing food could be something other than a battle against starvation. What are we planting? Kriemhild asked in halting English. Lettuce, radishes, beans, tomatoes, Merle replied, pointing to each packet of seeds, fast-growing crops. You will see results before autumn. The promise of seeing something grow from seed to harvest felt almost miraculous. Roswitha, the mechanic, approached, gardening with the same methodical precision she applied to engines. She measured spacing exactly, arranged rows with geometric precision, treated each seed as a component in a larger system. As they worked, something shifted among the women. Conversations flowed more easily. Laughter emerged occasionally, tentative but genuine. The act of planting seeds in fertile soil became an act of hope, a commitment to a future that extended beyond their captivity. By midday, the garden plot was transformed. Neat rows of planted seeds stretched across the space, marked with small wooden stakes. The women stood back to survey their work, dirt under their fingernails, sweat on their brows, and something approaching peace in their expressions. Captain Wallace Pemberton arranged a work detail to the local grain elevator 6 weeks into their internment. 8 women, including Ingeborg Schwartz, Elfriede Hartmann, and Roswitha Engel, volunteered to assist with inventory documentation. The facility needed records organized, and the women's administrative and clerical experience made them ideal for the task. The grain elevator rose like a cathedral against the prairie sky, its concrete structure dominating the flat landscape. Sergeant Angus McTavish drove them in a transport truck, his Scottish accent thick as he explained the facility's purpose. Stores the harvest from farms within 50 miles, ships it east by rail. When they entered the main storage building, Ingeborg stopped walking. The interior stretched upward in vast cylindrical chambers, each one filled with grain, wheat, barley, oats, each silo holding more grain than she had seen in her entire life. The smell was overwhelming, the scent of abundance made physical. "How much?" she whispered to Lieutenant Kensington, who had accompanied them. Myrtle checked the facility records. "This elevator can store approximately 2 million bushels, currently holding about 1.7 million. Ingeborg's mind performed calculations automatically, a habit from her years as a supply coordinator. 2 million bushels was roughly 54,000 metric tons. That was enough to feed a city of 100,000 people for 6 months. And this was one grain elevator in one small prairie town. She sat down suddenly on the concrete floor, her legs no longer able to support her weight. "I rationed food for an entire district," she said in German, her voice breaking. "I calculated down to individual grams. I decided who would eat and who would go hungry. And this is one building in one town, in one province." Gudrun knelt beside her, understanding the crisis unfolding. During the war, Ingeborg had been responsible for distribution logistics in Stuttgart. She had watched children starve while she allocated insufficient rations according to impossible formulas. She had made choices that haunted her every night. "All those children," Ingeborg continued, tears streaming down her face, "all those families. I told them there was no more food. I believed we were all starving equally. But this exists. This has always existed. While we were dying, this was here." Elfriede and Heidemarie helped Ingeborg to her feet, supporting her weight between them. Roswitha stood staring at the silos, her mechanic's mind calculating volumes and quantities, reaching the same devastating conclusions. Sergeant McTavish watched uncomfortably, uncertain how to respond to this breakdown. Lieutenant Kensington approached Ingeborg carefully. "The war created artificial scarcity in Germany. Your government chose military production over feeding its people. This abundance was not hidden from you out of cruelty. It was the result of different priorities, different choices." "But we did not know we had a choice," Ingeborg said, her voice hollow. "We thought everyone was suffering. We thought sacrifice was universal. Instead, we were sacrificed while others lived in plenty." The work detail was canceled that day. The women returned to camp in silence, each processing their own calculations about what they had seen. Beatrice Thorensen was 12 years old, curious beyond measure, and completely unafraid of the German prisoners who worked in her father's fields. She appeared one Saturday morning while Elfriede, Gudrun, and Sigrun were helping repair fence posts on the Thorensen property, part of a supervised work program that Captain Pemberton had approved. The girl approached directly, her blonde braids bouncing as she walked. "Why did Germany start the war?" she asked without preamble, her child's directness cutting through all diplomatic courtesy. Elfriede looked to Sergeant McTavish, who supervised their work detail, but he simply shrugged. "She is allowed to ask questions. You are allowed to answer or not." Gudrun knelt to Beatrice's eye level, considering how to explain something she barely understood herself. "We were told that Germany was surrounded by enemies who wanted to destroy us. We were told that we had to defend ourselves or be destroyed. Many people believed this because we were afraid. But Canada never attacked Germany, Beatrice said, her logic simple and unanswerable. We are very far away. Why would we want to destroy you? Sigrun laughed bitterly. An excellent question, one we should have asked ourselves. Did you want to fight? Beatrice pressed. Elfrida set down the fence post she had been holding. I did not want to fight. I wanted to serve my country, which I thought meant protecting my family and my home. I did not understand until much later that I was serving something very different. What were you protecting them from? Beatrice asked. Lies, Gudrun said quietly. We were protecting lies. We just did not know it at the time. Beatrice considered this carefully, her young face serious. My teacher says that people who do bad things always think they are doing good things. She says that is what makes them dangerous. Not that they are evil, but that they are certain they are right. The simplicity of this observation struck Elfrida like a physical blow. This child had articulated something that had taken her months of captivity to begin understanding. They had not been evil. They had been certain, and their certainty had made them dangerous. Your teacher is very wise, Elfrida said. She is German too, Beatrice said matter-of-factly. Mrs. Fairchild. Her family came here in 1933. She says they left because they could see what was coming and did not want to be part of it. Another family who had seen the truth and escaped. Elfrida wondered how many people had recognized the danger while the majority remained blind. How many had tried to warn others, only to be dismissed or silenced? Do you hate us? Sigrun asked the girl suddenly. Beatrice shook her head. My papa says hate is for people who do not have enough work to do. He says if you are busy helping things grow, you do not have time to hate. She paused. Are you helping things grow now? Gudrun smiled despite the tears in her eyes. We are trying to, yes. Then I think you are doing good things now, Beatrice said with the absolute certainty that only children possess, even if you did not before. October arrived with crisp mornings and the urgent rhythm of harvest season. Clifford Thorenson requested additional workers from the camp, and Captain Pemberton approved a detail of 15 women to assist with bringing in the wheat crop. The prisoners traveled each morning to the Thorenson farm in a transport truck, returning each evening exhausted but strangely satisfied. Roswitha discovered that her mechanical skills translated perfectly to maintaining the harvesting equipment. She worked alongside Clifford, adjusting combines and repairing machinery that broke down under the constant demands of harvest. The equipment was newer and better maintained than anything she had seen in Germany, even before the war. This combine is only 3 years old, she said to Elfrida as they took a water break. In Frankfurt, we were using equipment from 1925, held together with improvised parts and prayers. This is newer than what we had when Germany was supposedly the most advanced nation in Europe. Adelheid Klein worked in the grain truck, shoveling wheat from the combine's hopper. The physical labor was exhausting, but she found satisfaction in it that her telegraph work had never provided. Each shovel full of grain represented abundance, plenty, a future without hunger. She thought of Nuremberg, where people had fought over scraps in the streets. The waste horrified them most. Grain that fell from trucks was left on the ground. Partially damaged wheat was separated out and used for animal feed. Opal Thorenson mentioned casually that some years they had more grain than they could sell, and it simply sat in storage until prices improved. During lunch break, the women sat in the shade of the grain truck, eating sandwiches that Opal had prepared. Thick slices of ham, fresh bread, cheese, apples from the orchard. It was a worker's lunch, nothing special by Canadian standards. By German standards, it was a feast. In Stuttgart, Ingeborg said quietly, we collected every grain of wheat that fell during transport. We had committees that inspected the grain elevators for waste. People were punished for allowing even small amounts to spoil. She gestured at the grain lying scattered on the ground beneath the truck. This would have fed a family for a week. Haida Marie watched Clifford operating the combine with casual expertise, moving across fields that seemed to stretch to infinity. "How much land do you farm?" she asked Opal. 2,000 acres, Opal replied, "about average for this region. Some of our neighbors farm 5,000 or more." The numbers were incomprehensible. Haida Marie tried to convert acres to hectares, to visualize 2,000 acres of productive farmland, owned by a single family. In Germany, such concentration of agricultural resources would have been impossible, unthinkable. Here it was ordinary. As the sun set over the prairie, painting the wheat fields gold and amber, Elfrida stood watching the last loads of grain being transported to the elevator. This single family's harvest would feed thousands of people, and they were just one farm among hundreds in this region alone. November brought the first serious snowfall to Prairie Vista Camp, transforming the landscape into an endless expanse of white. The women gathered in the common room where Captain Pemberton had called a meeting to discuss repatriation procedures. The war in Europe had been over for 6 months. The administrative machinery of peace was finally catching up. "Transportation to Hamburg will be arranged for December 15th, Captain Pemberton announced, Lieutenant Kensington translating. "You will be processed through displaced persons camps before being released. To return to your homes, those who wish to return should submit their names by the end of this week." The room fell silent. For months, they had known this moment would come. Yet now that it arrived, no one seemed prepared for it. Elfrida looked around at the faces of women who had become something more than fellow prisoners. They had become a community forged through shared revelation and transformation. That evening, the women gathered in small groups, their conversations intense and troubled. Gudrun sat with Elfrida, Haida Marie, and Ingeborg, speaking in hushed German about impossible choices. "My mother's last letter said not to worry about returning quickly," Gudrun said. "She wrote that I should take time to recover from my ordeal, but I know what she really means. She is telling me there is nothing to return to." Haida Marie held a letter from her brother that had arrived 2 weeks earlier. He writes that former Auxiliary Corps members are not welcome, that women who served are viewed with suspicion, that it would be better if I stayed away until attitudes change. Ingeborg had received no letters at all since August. Her family's silence spoke louder than any words could. Stuttgart had been heavily bombed. The likelihood that her entire family had survived was small. She would be returning to a city of strangers, to rubble, to a Germany that no longer existed. "I cannot imagine staying," Sigrun said quietly. "This is not our home. We are prisoners, not immigrants." "Are we still prisoners?" Roswitha asked. "We work voluntarily. We move freely within assigned boundaries. We are treated with respect. This feels less like imprisonment than our last years in Germany felt like freedom." Kriemhild spoke carefully, articulating what many were thinking. "If I return, I go back to devastation, starvation, and suspicion. If I stay, I remain in a place where I have found unexpected kindness. But staying feels like betrayal, like abandoning my country when it needs rebuilding most." "Perhaps that is exactly the question," Elfrida said. "Do we owe loyalty to a country that lied to us, that used us, that created the conditions for this war? Or do we owe loyalty to ourselves, to building lives that honor truth instead of propaganda?" The debate continued late into the night, with no easy answers emerging. By morning, the camp was divided, not into factions, but into individual women wrestling with personal decisions that would define the rest of their lives. Outside, snow continued to fall on the prairie, covering everything in white silence. The mail delivery in late November brought 23 letters, more than any previous shipment. Corporal Lefebvre distributed them with her usual gentle efficiency, but this time the contents would shift the calculus of every woman's decision about repatriation. Kriemhild's letter came from a neighbor, not her brother. Her hands shook as she read the careful words explaining that her brother had died in October from complications related to malnutrition and his war injuries. The neighbor wrote that he had simply grown weaker each week until his body gave out. There had been no medical care available. He was buried in a mass grave because individual plots were no longer possible. She set the letter down and walked outside into the cold November air, not bothering with a coat. Lieutenant Kensington found her 20 minutes later, standing in the snow, staring at nothing. "He survived Stalingrad," Kriemhild said in German, her voice empty. "He lost his arm, but he survived. And then he died because there was not enough food to keep him alive." She turned to Myrtle. "If I return, what am I returning to? A grave I cannot even locate?" Adelheid received a letter from her father that was brief and devastating in its honesty. "Do not come home," he had written. "There is nothing here for you. The city is ruins. We have no house. Your mother and I live in a basement with 6 other families. There is no work, there is barely food. Stay where you are if they will let you. Build a life somewhere that still has a future." Her father, who had encouraged her to join the auxiliary corps, who had believed in Germany's cause, was now telling her to abandon their homeland. The reversal spoke volumes about how completely everything had collapsed. Ingeborg finally received a letter, but it was from the Red Cross, not her family. The message was formal and impersonal. Records indicated that her entire family had died in the bombing of Stuttgart in March 1945. Her mother, her sister, her 2 nephews. All gone while she had been in captivity, while she had been eating fresh bread and working in gardens. She showed the letter to Elfrida without speaking. There were no words adequate to the moment. Elfrida held her while she wept, both of them understanding that Ingeborg's choice had just been made for her. She had no family to return to, no home waiting, nothing but ruins and memories. Haida Marie's letter brought different but equally troubling news. Her nursing certification was not recognized in occupied Germany. The new provisional government was not accepting credentials from those who had served in military auxiliary positions. If she returned, she would not be allowed to practice medicine. Her skills, her training, her calling would be wasted. By evening, 32 women had made their decision. They would formally request to remain in Canada. The reasons varied, but the underlying truth was the same. Germany had nothing to offer them but suffering, and Canada had shown them that different futures were possible. Opal Thorensen arrived at Prairie Vista Camp on a Sunday morning in early December with an unexpected invitation. She had coordinated with Captain Pemberton to bring 6 of the German women to her home for dinner. Elfrida, Gudrun, Haida Marie, Sigrun, Roswitha, and Ingeborg were selected, representing those who had worked most consistently on the Thorensen farm during harvest. The farmhouse was warm and filled with smells that triggered memories of childhood, of times before the war when Sunday dinners were about abundance rather than scarcity. A roasted chicken sat in the center of the table, surrounded by mashed potatoes, gravy, fresh vegetables, and bread. It was a meal that would have fed 20 people in wartime Germany. Beatrice helped her mother set the table, chattering excitedly about school and the upcoming Christmas pageant. She treated the German women like visiting aunts, asking questions about their lives with the comfortable familiarity of a child who had never known enemies. Clifford said grace before the meal, his words simple and sincere. "Lord, we thank you for this food, for this company, and for the opportunity to share what we have with those who need it. Help us build bridges where there were once walls. Amen." As they ate, conversation flowed more easily than Elfrida had expected. Opal asked about their families, their backgrounds, their hopes for the future. She listened without judgment, her questions genuine rather than accusatory. Clifford spoke about farming, about the challenges of prairie agriculture, treating them as colleagues rather than former enemies. "Why are you being so kind to us?" Gudrun asked suddenly, the question that had been building in all of them finally spoken aloud. Opal set down her fork and considered her answer carefully. "My grandfather came to Canada from Norway with nothing but the clothes on his back. He was given land, opportunity, and acceptance by people who had no reason to help him. He taught my father, who taught me, that we are stewards of abundance. Our responsibility is to share it, not hoard it. But we were your enemies, Haida Marie said. You were soldiers in a war you did not start, Clifford replied. Now the war is over. You are young women far from home, trying to decide what kind of future to build. That does not make you our enemies. That makes you human beings deserving of dignity and a second chance. After dinner, Opal brought out apple pie, serving generous slices with fresh cream. The women ate slowly, trying to memorize every flavor, every texture, every moment of this unexpected grace. This was not charity. It was not pity. It was simply kindness offered freely, without conditions or expectations of gratitude. As they prepared to return to camp, Opal pulled Elfriede aside. If you decide to stay in Canada, our farm could use reliable workers, room and board included, with wages. Consider it, if you wish. The offer was made quietly, without fanfare, as if offering employment to former enemy prisoners was the most natural thing in the world. The news that 32 German women had requested to remain in Canada rather than accept repatriation spread through the local community like ripples across water. The reaction was mixed, passionate, and revealed the complicated nature of forgiveness in the immediate aftermath of war. Mrs. Beryl Fairchild called an emergency meeting at the town hall in mid-December. As the local school teacher and a German immigrant herself, she understood both sides of the emerging debate. More than 80 townspeople attended, their voices raised in argument before the meeting officially began. These women served the Nazi regime, argued Thomas Merchant, a veteran who had lost his brother in the liberation of Holland. Why should we welcome them here when good Canadian boys died fighting what they represented? Mrs. Fairchild stood at the front of the room, her voice calm but firm. These women were clerks, nurses, and radio operators. They were not SS officers. They were not concentration camp guards. They were young women who believed they were serving their country, just as our young men believed they were serving Canada. They should face justice in Germany, another voice called out. Father Ignatius Brennan rose to speak, his Irish accent thick with conviction. I have visited these women at the camp. I have spoken with them at length. What I found was not ideology or hatred, but genuine remorse and a desperate desire to build better lives. Sending them back to starvation and chaos serves no purpose but revenge. Opal Thorenson stood, her presence commanding immediate attention. My family has employed several of these women during harvest. They worked harder than any hired help we have had in years. They were honest, respectful, and grateful for the opportunity. If we turn them away, we are not protecting Canada. We are abandoning our own values. The debate raged for 2 hours. Sergeant McTavish attended in civilian clothes, offering testimony about the women's conduct at the camp. Lieutenant Kensington spoke about their transformation over the months of internment. Private Jacobson described working alongside them in the garden, seeing their genuine desire to contribute rather than merely exist in captivity. Dr. Robert Hayes, the camp physician, provided medical perspective. Several of these women arrived with malnutrition-related health issues. They had been starving before their capture. Whatever Germany was, it was not caring for its own people. These women are not threats. They are survivors of a regime that consumed its own citizens. Slowly, the tone of the meeting shifted. Not everyone was convinced, but enough voices spoke in support that the absolute opposition began to soften. Mrs. Fairchild proposed a compromise. Those who wished to sponsor the women could do so voluntarily. Those who objected could simply decline to participate. The community need not be unanimous, only willing to allow individual choices. By the end of the meeting, 7 families had volunteered to serve as sponsors. Others promised to consider it. The path forward was not smooth, but it existed. December 10th arrived with heavy snow and heavier hearts. The women gathered in the common room for what would be their final meeting as a complete group. Captain Pemberton had requested that each woman state her decision clearly so that appropriate arrangements could be made. 32 women chose to remain in Canada. 16 chose repatriation to Germany. The division cut across friendships, backgrounds, and circumstances in ways that defied simple categorization. Elfrida stood to explain her decision to stay. "I have no family waiting for me in Berlin. I have no home to return to. But more than that, I have discovered something here that I never knew existed. The possibility of building a life based on truth rather than propaganda, on contribution rather than ideology. I choose to stay." Gudrun echoed similar reasoning. "Dresden is rubble. My family has urged me not to return. I have skills in communications that could be useful here. I have been offered sponsorship by Mrs. Fairchild, who will help me continue my education. I choose to stay and honor the second chance I have been given." Haida Marie spoke with tears in her eyes. "I became a nurse to help people heal. In Germany, I cannot practice medicine because of my service record. Here, Dr. Hayes has offered to help me obtain Canadian certification. I can continue healing people. I choose to stay and serve through my work." But not everyone chose to remain. Gerlinda Roth, the nurse from Cologne, stood with quiet dignity. "I understand why many of you choose to stay. But Germany is broken, and broken things need mending. I have skills that my country needs. To stay here in comfort while my homeland suffers feels like cowardice to me. I choose to return." Uta Schultz, the mechanic from Frankfurt, agreed. "My family survived the war. They are waiting for me. I cannot abandon them, even if life here would be easier. Family is not something you set aside when circumstances become difficult. I choose to return." Luitgard Werner, the youngest, spoke with surprising maturity. "I am only 19. If I stay here, I will never truly know my own country, my own people. I will spend my life wondering what I ran from. I need to return to see with my own eyes what Germany has become before I can decide where I truly belong." The debate was not acrimonious. Each woman respected the other's reasoning, understanding that there were no wrong answers, only different calculations of duty, hope, and belonging. Some chose Canada because they had nothing to return to. Others chose Germany because they had everything to return for. Ingeborg, who had lost her entire family, chose to stay. But Sieglinde Beck, who had also lost everyone, chose to return. The decisions were individual, personal, based on factors that could not be generalized or predicted. By the end of the meeting, the division was clear. Those remaining would begin the process of applying for landed immigrant status. Those returning would prepare for transport to Hamburg in 5 days. The process of finding sponsors for 32 German women proved easier than anyone had anticipated. Within a week of the town hall meeting, enough Canadian families had volunteered that every woman who wished to remain had multiple options to consider. The Thorensen family formally offered to sponsor Elfrida. The arrangement included housing in their guest cottage, employment on the farm, and assistance with immigration paperwork. Opal made the offer over tea in Captain Pemberton's office, her manner practical rather than sentimental. "We need reliable workers year-round, not just at harvest. You have proven yourself capable and trustworthy. The wage is $30 monthly plus room and board. You will be treated as an employee, not as charity. We expect quality work in return for quality treatment." Elfrida accepted immediately, understanding that this offer represented more than employment. It was a pathway to citizenship, to belonging, to a future built on her own merits rather than on her past mistakes. Mrs. Fairchild sponsored Gudrun, offering housing and assistance in enrolling at the Regional Teachers College. "You have a gift for languages and education. Canada needs teachers, especially those who can help immigrant children bridge multiple cultures. I see potential in you that should not be wasted." Dr. Hayes arranged for Haida Marie to work as a medical assistant while studying for Canadian nursing certification. The process would take 2 years, but he promised to supervise her training personally. You have instincts that cannot be taught. The technical knowledge can be learned. I will help you. Father Brennan organized a sponsorship collective for 5 women who had no specific skills but strong work ethics. Local businesses agreed to provide employment while families offered housing. The arrangement was complex but workable, demonstrating the community's commitment to the project. Roswitha received an offer from the local mechanic, Harold Jensen, who needed skilled help in his garage. I am getting old and my son moved to Vancouver. You know engines better than anyone I have interviewed in 5 years. I do not care where you learned. I care that you can fix what is broken. Each offer came with conditions and expectations. The women would need to report regularly to immigration authorities. They would need to maintain employment and good conduct. They would need to learn English fluently and demonstrate integration into Canadian society. But these conditions felt achievable, reasonable, the natural requirements of beginning new lives. Captain Pemberton processed the paperwork with Lieutenant Kensington's assistance, ensuring that everything complied with both Canadian immigration law and international agreements regarding prisoners of war. The legal complexity was significant, but the political will existed to make it work. By December 14th, all 32 women had secured sponsorships and begun the formal immigration process. The next morning, they would say goodbye to the 16 who had chosen to return to Germany. December 15th dawned cold and clear, the prairie sky vast and indifferent to the emotional weight of the day. The transport truck arrived at Prairie Vista Camp at 8 in the morning, its engine rumbling like a mechanical goodbye. 16 women prepared to board, their belongings packed in the same military duffel bags they had arrived with 7 months earlier. The farewell gathering in the common room was unlike anything Captain Pemberton had witnessed in his military career. Former enemies embraced like sisters. Women who had spent months together in captivity now faced separation that might last forever. The division was not between those who had changed and those who had not, but between different definitions of duty and home. Gerlinda Roth held Heidemarie's hands tightly, speaking in rapid German. "You are making the right choice for you. I am making the right choice for me. Neither of us is wrong. Promise me you will become a great nurse here. Promise me you will honor the second chance you have been given." Heidemarie nodded through tears. "Promise me you will write. Promise me you will tell me if Germany becomes worth returning to. Promise me you will survive whatever comes next." Elfriede embraced Uta Schultz, the mechanic who had chosen to return. "Your family is lucky to have you coming back to them. Your skills will help rebuild what was destroyed. You are choosing the harder path, and that takes courage I am not sure I possess." Uta smiled sadly. "You are choosing the unknown. That takes a different kind of courage. We are both brave in our own ways." Lieutenant Kensington addressed the departing women in German, her voice thick with emotion. "You came here as prisoners. You leave as women who have confronted hard truths about yourselves and your country. Whatever happens in Germany, remember that you have seen what is possible when former enemies choose cooperation over hatred. Carry that knowledge with you. Let it guide your choices in rebuilding your homeland." Sergeant McTavish and Private Jacobson loaded the duffel bags onto the truck with unusual care, treating each one as if it contained something precious rather than just worn clothing and letters. Corporal Lefebvre distributed travel provisions, her French accent soft with sympathy as she handed each woman a package of food for the journey. The 16 women climbed into the transport truck one by one. They did not look back as the vehicle pulled away, not because they did not care, but because looking back would have been unbearable. The 32 who remained stood watching until the truck disappeared into the white prairie distance, each woman wondering if they had made the right choice, knowing they would spend years questioning and perhaps never knowing for certain. Inside the barracks that evening, the space felt empty despite 32 women still occupying it. They had become accustomed to 48 voices, 48 stories, 48 different ways of processing the same impossible circumstances. Now the silence spoke of division, of roads diverging, of futures that would unfold in vastly different ways. 23 years later, in September 1968, Elfrida Hartman Thorensen stood in her kitchen preparing preserves from the garden she had tended every summer since arriving in Canada. Her hands moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent more than 2 decades working the land. Through the window, she could see the wheat fields that had once terrified her with their endlessness, now familiar as her own reflection. Her daughter Catherine, 16 years old and born in Saskatchewan, helped wash mason jars at the sink. The girl spoke English without accent, attended the local high school, and knew her mother's story only in fragments carefully revealed over years. She understood that her mother had come from Germany, had been a prisoner during the war, had chosen to stay. The details remained protected, not from shame, but from complexity too vast for simple explanation. A letter had arrived that morning from Gudrun, now Dr. Gudrun Lindemann Fairchild, teaching linguistics at the University of Saskatchewan. She wrote about a planned reunion of the women who had chosen to remain. 17 of the original 32 were still in the province. 3 had moved to other parts of Canada. 2 had died. 10 were thriving in ways that would have seemed impossible in 1945. Heidemarie had become head nurse at the regional hospital, exactly as Dr. Hayes had predicted. Roswitha owned the garage where she had once worked as an employee, her mechanical expertise legendary throughout the district. Ingeborg had married a widowed farmer and raised his 3 children as her own, finding family where blood had failed to provide it. Each woman had built a life from the ruins of her past, but Elfrida also maintained correspondence with Gerlinde, who had returned to Cologne and spent 20 years rebuilding German healthcare infrastructure. Her letters spoke of a Germany transformed, a nation that had confronted its past and committed to different futures. She wrote about democracy, about reconciliation, about younger generations who refused to repeat their parents' mistakes. The 2 versions of Germany, the one Elfrida had fled and the one Gerlinde had helped create, were vastly different places. "Was it hard choosing to stay?" Catherine asked suddenly, her teenager's directness reminiscent of young Beatrice Thorensen asking why Germany had started the war. Elfrida considered the question with the care it deserved. "It was the hardest and easiest decision I ever made. Hard because it meant accepting that everything I had believed was false. Easy because the alternative was returning to a place where I would starve physically and spiritually." She thought about the impossible horizon she had seen from the transport truck in May 1945, about wheat fields that had taught her the difference between propaganda and reality, about Canadian families who had shown her that former enemies could become neighbors and friends. "I chose to plant seeds in fertile soil rather than scatter them on poisoned ground," she told her daughter. "Some of the women who returned to Germany planted seeds there, and some of those seeds grew into good things. We made different choices, but we all chose to plant rather than to wallow in what had been destroyed. That is what matters."